This is the 6th day of the March 90 7-day retreat in Springwater. In connection with the talk yesterday, someone asked, what is the difference between looking into oneself, having some awareness of what goes on, the state of whatever, insufficiency, depression, and being immediately down on oneself because of that, and wanting to eliminate it, cut it off, be done with it. And seeing it gently or lovingly, as you said. What's the difference between those two ways? Looking into oneself, coming upon whatever. It's all there at one time or another, the whole spectrum of human want, fear, illusion, desire, jealousy, envy, ambition, violence, hurt, or the desire for revenge. What's the difference between seeing it, judging it, wanting to be rid of it, cut it off, and looking at it gently, lovingly? It was not a theoretical question for that person, because indeed it is possible, she said, to look at something lovingly. Maybe for the first time. One has always judged, one has always wanted to do better, to be rid of, overcome what is known to be bad, negative, painful, unacceptable. And in talking about it, looking at it together, came upon that a strong element in the first way is will. The will to fight, the will to overcome, the will to get rid of or dominate that inner voice of will, we call it will, but very often it is just talking to oneself, about oneself, in harsh ways, so often reveals itself as the internalized voice of the father, the mother, the older brother or sister, teachers, priests, ministers, educators, child rearers, which just from sheer imitation, maybe other dynamics that go with it, have been internalized and now operate in this brain and body. We have been trained to exert will. We have been trained in the idea that we can dominate ourselves, control ourselves, exert will upon ourselves, to be different, to be better, to control or to cut that out, as irate or impatient parents will say to their children. And that voice is always harsh, irritated, raspy, unkindly, without love. We were talking about it. How when, as parent oneself, or maybe supervisor of someone, or a sibling, one sees something one does not like, does not approve of in another, how does one speak to that person? How does one speak to the child, or to the husband or wife, or whoever one is living with, the companion? And the amazing thing is, we don't know how we speak. We don't hear ourselves. It takes a real fearless opening of the ear to hear how we talk, how we sound. When we talk, if somebody asked me, how did you say this? I may say, I try to say it as gently as possible. I really wasn't mad. I remember the first time somebody here told me, you yelled at me. I said, what are you talking about? I don't yell at people. I still don't believe it, but this is what the person said. Remember the first time I was in my teens, my mother bitterly complaining about my sister, who was a very rebellious person, and she could do things against the will of my mother, which was never possible for me. But I was at home while she was not there to hear the anger of my mother about that. And at one point, I don't know how I got up the gumption, what the situation was, to tell her that I had been afraid of her most of the time. And she was aghast. I really felt bad over having said that to her. She was so hurt. She didn't believe it. It was not true. She was not angry. She was a loving person who had loving feelings for us, and there was no awareness of what had gone on. And very recently, participating, as it were, by sheer presence in the breakup of the family, of our children. The pain of misunderstanding coming from not seeing, knowing, or hearing how husband and wife talk to each other, both maintaining that it is without anger, not nagging, with some care, and yet it be difficult to hear the way of their speech. We're not saying it's bad to be angry, or one shouldn't be angry, but can one begin to open the ear, or allow the ear to let in the sound of one's own voice as one talks to one's companion, husband, spouse, and children? It struck me too how the mother cannot say anything, particularly to the son. It's easier with the daughter, without a sting in the voice, a reproach, a threat, or something that is hurting, and yet not aware of it. Because deep down she cares very much about the child. Child very important to her, and to care for the children, be with them. And yet the sound of it and the effect of it isn't seen. Of course, the child, the boy talking to his sister, sounds just like his mother, and then some more. And then, of course, the mother will say, "Why do you talk like that to your little sister? What did she do? You don't have to be so harsh." Or, "Why do you talk so irritatedly at me? You can tell me you don't have to be so harsh." Or angry or irritated. Why do we only hear it in the other? Why don't we hear it in ourselves? Is it again because we have such strong images of what we are? Is it something in the acoustic memory, mechanism of hearing oneself? People do say when they hear themselves on a tape, "That's not me, I don't sound like that." So we can't quite hear ourselves as someone else hears us. But it is possible, when all images go and there is interest, genuine interest, to find out, how do I sound when I criticize somebody or correct somebody, if this is I'm not talking about myself here. Oh, this includes all of us. Point something out to somebody. Say something that would be good to be handled differently. How do I sound? Is there already this whole tradition, deeply ingrained, traditional inner voice, which only knows an angry intonation or a sharp intonation when criticizing something, or asking for something, or pointing out something that should be done differently or could be done differently? Yesterday, in talking to someone who said, "I'm becoming more and more like my mother," which is what all of us do. We become more and more like our mothers and fathers because of this mechanism. Seemed to express a certain hopelessness of this as an irreversible cause. I don't think so. It doesn't have to be. If one thinks so, the thought may bring it about. Because in us, in all of us, there's also left over from earliest of childhood the tremendous awe of this giant human being that took care of us. Awe, respect, and maybe admiration for someone who could do everything that we couldn't do or weren't allowed to do. this awe and admiration of it, may that whole remembered mechanism may still be at work in actually promoting becoming and sounding like one's mother or father or older brothers, sisters, or whoever one's models were, and the ones who imprinted upon us this inner voice of evaluation and judgment. So on the one hand, not wanting to be like that. On the other hand, that's what it means being big, grown, powerful, which we weren't, from which we suffered so much, being controlled and pushed around or criticized, even by the most loving of parents, because it's very hard to be with children all the time, very demanding. And at first, children don't know what they're supposed to do and not supposed to do. Anything goes. A very long, arduous learning process for both parent and child, particularly since we don't live in an igloo or a teepee. Where there isn't much to destroy or hurt or damage. Or get damaged by. So is that a clue for looking freshly at our relationship with each other? How do I sound? And to talk and listen at the same time how one sounds is nothing common or usual. It takes a certain openness and inner stillness, not being totally absorbed with what one wants to say and trying to put that across or have that arrive. It is the opening of the whole field of the talker and the receiver and the listener. Not only listening to how one sounds, but how does this sound to the other without cutting oneself apart over it. I don't mean being in conflict over it, just the curiosity of it. And when we find that in such listening, the voice may change. Maybe not immediately. At first, it has to be discovered what is going on. And if it really is discovered what is going on, it's tremendous to find out how long one has done this and without hearing it, without awareness, and how deeply ingrained it is, how everything in the whole system that invocates words is already conditioned, including whatever the body contributes to the emphasis of it all, the emotion, the irritation. Also, what we have learned by having been children and having been very often angrily told what we did wrong, it seems to be as though this is how you have to do that. That's the way to do it. Or else a person won't listen. That's what my mother always said. I have to become angry. She did say that. Or else you won't listen. And if one may be a person who is not heard very easily, maybe in a meeting, people don't pay much attention to one, and then if one does get the floor for a moment, something they just blurt out so intensely and angrily. Everybody may wonder, well, why is she so angry or he so angry? was the way to get a word in and to maybe break through the resistance one feels of being heard. Maybe it wasn't even anger, maybe it was just the passion and intensity with which one feels something and the need to be heard. So it's not just listening to how we sound in talking, but how the other person sounds without just taking the sound at face value, or its sound value, but wondering what are all the ingredients of this person sounding like that? Not immediately categorizing him or her as angry or mad or unfriendly, domineering, all the things that we immediately attribute to someone from our own repertoire of experiences. There's this tremendous challenge, isn't it, in being together, meeting together, communicating with each other. To suspend judgment and therefore raise the range of listening. When something is really heard, then the awareness has its own action. Then change can occur without will. It comes out of the intelligence of awareness, of hearing. And in that awareness is also lovingness. So in listening to the inner voice, just talk here inwardly, getting away again from communicating with each other, just this discovery of what goes on inside, and then the harsh inner voice which has will in it, the will to do something about it, to condemn, to change, to control, to cut out. Can that be perceived without judgment? It sounds so paradoxical, doesn't it? It doesn't make sense logically. Can harshness within be perceived without harshness? And yet however paradoxical it sounds or not making sense, it can and does happen. How? No one knows. It's not a matter of how, but it can happen. And a lovingness coming into being is the only true way for change, because will only represses or substitutes, drives underground, or denies, upholds the image. There's no change in that. It's just a perpetuation of the same thing in a different guise. Whereas a loving insight, a gentle insight, maybe like snow melting in the sun. And as this person who was talking about it, we were discussing it in a meeting, remarked, then one doesn't have to demand and look for love from the outside, because it's inside. which is an amazing discovery, isn't it? Because we have thought all along that if there is to be love, we have to seek for it, receive it from someone else. This tremendous yearning for being loved in a human being is almost always directed toward the outside, to find someone who will fulfill that need. And on that journey of finding this one who will fulfill this need, so many disappointments, so many expectations. Occasional pleasure, occasional joy, and yet so much heartache. Because this love one has found for oneself from the outside, from someone else, may suddenly go to somebody else. And one is left with the empty bowl. So is there a way of finding this wellspring of love within? Is there a method, a technique, a practice? Or does it happen entirely on its own? And yet not unconnected to listening to the harsh voice inside, without condemning it. Without knowing what to do about it, just listening. Without a feeling of separation. No judge there. No doer, no controller. Just what is. Having mentioned the incident with my mother, I also want to say that the first time that I saw my mother without an image, which did not happen as an effort of will or intention, it happened. Just seeing her standing in the dining room near a case of glass in which she had displayed all kinds of things that were dear to her. Seeing her without an image, it was amazing. The relationship completely changed. And no fear of her. And for the first time that I could remember, a love for her, who had been such a threatening figure in my life. And not only seeing her without an image, but no image of myself as I knew I was seen by my mother all my life. That also dropped. I didn't have to perform or be somebody in her presence. No facade. And that's relationship. And there was some reciprocity in that. It didn't just come from here to there. Because the image that we present to others, even though the others may have initially have instilled it, or been part of the people who've instilled it, blocks relationship. Even though one is the dutiful or gentle daughter who always goes along and so forth, it blocks relationship. It's not freedom. And when one of the two can act and respond freely without this, what did we call it, straitjacket of imagery, that may have an effect on the other, it may not. One has to see. But very likely does. Who knows? It's not the reason. There's no reason in dropping it anyways. It happens. It happens when there is concern with this whole thing. And observing over many years or whatever time span what this image does. The conflicts, the inhibitions, the separation, the constant pressure to uphold it, and the blindness, because it blinds. One doesn't see what one does directly, unabashedly. Someone mentioned that during the talk yesterday, even though the feeling of depression and everything else going with it lifted, and after the talk it lifted somewhat, settled down again, settled in again. But something else was observed. That for the moments it lifted, there manifested a fear of losing it. Of being without what one has become habituated to. And the fear of the unknown. Can we just spend a little bit of time with this fear of the unknown, which is also the fear of dying, of ending, of not being anymore, of not being alive anymore, with our family, with the people that we cherish, the things we cherish. What is that fear of dying, the fear of the unknown? A very powerful fear, which informs us, informs our actions, or rather deforms them. And it's something we want push away, not look into very much, not deal with. Because who wants to seek out something that's scary, frightening, depressing, saddening? And yet it's there, because we all know we're going to die. So, not try to resolve this fear of the unknown or of death, but to begin wondering, to begin a wondering questioning about what that is, and allow it to operate so that we can observe it when it's there. It doesn't remain completely incognito. What do we know about the unknown that we're so afraid of it? So afraid that we may cling to a state of painful depression. What do we know about it? What is unknown can't be known. So what we know about it is what we imagine. Is that clear? Does that make sense? We can't know what the unknown is, because the unknown is without thought. It is the absence of thought, the absence of knowledge. And yet we do have bits and bits of knowledge about it which terrorizes us. Words, sentences, headlines. I won't be there. I won't see this beautiful valley anymore. The sun and the flowers, I won't see them. But as this fear invades or pervades the organism with these headlines, does one see the beautiful valley now? The next moment it won't be like that, whether we're alive or dead. It'll have changed, which we can see in the course of a retreat. The changes are incredible, aren't they? Changes of color, of weather, of temperature, of ground. In some places on this country, the earth shifts and changes and shakes, quakes. So even if we survive the quake, we will not see what was there before. And that's a dramatic way of putting it. Each moment is fresh, new, changed. So why this sadness that pervades us if we think, I will not see this anymore? We're not seeing it now if we're saddened and fearful. And we won't if we continue with this fear. It will continue to hide, to blind, to distort our perceptions, or make us do all kinds of things to prevent death, to hoard things, to cling to possessions, to distract ourselves. What are we afraid of? Of not continuing as we know ourselves in our cherished, lifelong novel, chapter after chapter and more chapters to be written, looking forward to these future chapters. Somebody lent me 2 books at the beginning of the last off period. One was The Color Purple, and the other one was by the same author, called The Temple of My Familiar. I don't know if you're familiar with these books. Very impacting books, particularly the first one, to see the world from the eyes of a black woman. Not just eyes, but eyes and feelings, written in an amazingly non-judgmental way. It sort of fits in, doesn't it? How does someone else see this world from their background conditioning, oppression, tradition of oppression and being ignored, suppressed, and so forth. Can't go into this right now. But the thing that the author did in the second book, after you get into it a little bit, there appear these two dear characters from the first book. And it's nice. There they are. They're still alive. Still alive and spreading their cheer. And the same is done in TV serials. The public sometimes doesn't allow a character to die. It has become so attached to him or her that for financial reasons alone he has to be resurrected. I think I recounted once, was long ago, can get away with repeating that. I repeat myself all the time anyways. That Sherlock Holmes has a secretary. Did you know that? Or do you remember my telling that? He's dead. He never lived. But his stories live. My father used to read Sherlock Holmes in German to us after supper if we were good. And he stopped before Sherlock Holmes had figured this whole thing out, and we had to do that. Wanted us to train us in thinking. He wasn't too rigid about it. He usually then told us. We weren't too good. At least I wasn't. So, actually, when Sherlock Holmes died in one of the novels, the same thing happened. I understand Conan Doyle that was the author, had to bring him back because there was too much upset and demand in the readership for more Sherlock Holmes. And now there's a secretary who receives daily, I forget the amount of mail, but it is staggering. People writing to that famous address, which I have forgotten. And there she is, answering letters. I think it's very similar with not wanting to die. Because we're so enamored and attached to the story of ourselves. Fascinated by it. Deriving energy from it. Thinking that it's the energy of life, the energy we derive from thinking about our life, and thinking that it will continue ad infinitum. And I don't think it makes much difference whether one gets older. I haven't been 90 yet, but I think people who are 90 and who are not too ill or too pained or suffering want to continue living. Krishnamurti, before he was diagnosed as having this already metastasized cancer, several times, I'll still live another 5 or 10 years. Maybe he wanted to be 100. I don't know whether he had such wants. But wanting to be alive or wanting to continue living, does that have to go hand in hand, inseparably with being afraid of dying? And I don't think it does. And not only I don't think it does, it doesn't. One doesn't need to be afraid of dying. Why not? I don't know why not, but one doesn't need to be. It's like this kicking the table, wondering why one was always angry about it, and having wondered for years and years why one was afraid of dying, and then suddenly testing it out, and to one's amazement, finding that there is no fear of dying, of the thought of dying, or ending, or the unknown. Because the unknown does not need to be at the end of one's organismic life, when the body stops living, no heartbeat, no brain activity, dead. But not knowing is a state that can occur while fully alive. And no need to fear that state. There's nothing fearful or terrorizing about it. Only the thought about it is. And the thought about it is not that state, it's imagination. Connecting with all kinds of stuff, maybe from our unconscious, collective unconscious, whatever all of this stuff is that human beings have heaped up in memory, or the brain has, or the fields, the morphic fields have, wherever it's stored. There are horrifying stories about the unknown. Hell, underworld, or whatever we have invented. But not that hell doesn't exist in life. We live very hellish lives. But the fear of death is connected with imagination about what it is to be like buried alive. This is all the imagination can deliver. The best it can deliver is to be alive, because while I'm thinking about this, I'm alive, and yet I'm thinking about being buried. I don't have to think about that at all. Can there be nowness, here-ness? Whether it's depressed or oppressive, painful or joyful, without immediately needing to add this to one's story. Or if that happens because it's such an often practiced habit, can it become transparent as it happens and not just rule us unawares? The adding to the story and then the clinging to the story. Just see how it happens, observe it with a smile. Not taking it too seriously. Which connects in with the first part of our talk, not then being down on oneself that one is doing this. It happens. Strong habit. But doesn't have to continue when it's detected. So that then one is here. And what that is, we don't know yet. We haven't thought about it yet. we will end here for today.